From front of house to center stage, for over 25 years, Earthworks microphones have sculpted the sounds of your favorite concerts, venues, and performances. Earthworks Audio is a sponsor of the Tech Arts Podcast. We are so happy to have them on board and excited to promote the new Earthworks SR117 vocal mic and capsules. To find out more about Earthworks Audio or to get your hands on this mic, go to earthworksaudio.com. That's earthworksaudio.com. Capturing emotion with sound. earthworksaudio.com. From sold-out stadiums to intimate live performance venues, sound engineers agree on one thing for the best digital mixing consoles for live sound. The only name that matters is Digico. As the recognized worldwide standard for live audio mixing, Digico consoles are renowned for their industry-leading sound quality and ease of use. Whether your application is in a church, broadcast, theater, corporate, sports, or installed sound, Digico offers compact and affordable products. From the S21 all the way up to the pioneering power of the Quantum 852, Digico delivers the workflow, the feature set, and the absolute reliability that the world's biggest tours and programs have come to rely upon. If you're looking for a sound console, look to Digico for your answer. For more information on Digico, go to digico.biz. That's digico.biz.
This is the Tech Arts Podcast, where we talk about tech, leadership, and all things that concern church audio, video, and lighting.
Welcome to the Tech Arts Podcast and the Earthworks Audio Studios. My name is DL. So glad to have you joining us today. This podcast is dedicated to video. We'll be talking about a cool video tech tip, and we'll also dive into the subject of cinema, IMAG, and broadcast. What does it mean to shoot your service in a cinematic style? Does that require you to do something different? How does it relate to IMAG, and do you have to buy different gear? And finally, how does your broadcast switch play into your cinematic switch? We'll also talk about frames per second, or FPS, the history behind 24 frames per second, and how it can affect your video. Plus, we dive into some volunteer talk, answering questions like, when should you retrain your volunteers, and should kids be able to volunteer? This is going to be a fun one. You don't want to miss a second. But before we get things started, I want to remind everyone listening that we could not do this podcast without the help from worshipfacility.com, Earthworks Audio, Digico, Sermon Shots, and Digital Great Commission Ministries. That last one, Digital Great Commission Ministries, well, that's the life force behind this podcast. DGCM's goal is to provide churches with the ability to effectively use tech to help fulfill the Great Commission. From articles, a podcast, tech tips, to giving away free gear, DGCM is there for your church. Find out more about them by going to audiovideolighting.com. Hey, right now, DGCM is offering a special on two things. First, if your audio system needs a tune-up, DGCM offers the ability to come in and tune your sound system using the software Smart from Rational Acoustics. Second, if you want to learn how to use this powerful software on your own, DGCM is offering Zoom training classes that teach you how to use the Smart software. If you're interested in any of this or finding out more about DGCM, please go to audiovideolighting.com and click on Schedule a Call. Now, today's podcast features an interview with Jeremy Bagwell. Up until a few weeks ago, Jeremy worked for Ross as their House of Worship representative. Since we recorded this podcast, he has left that position and currently works for Skylark. Skylark is one of the great integration companies in the marketplace. If you've not heard of them, I would encourage you to go check them out at skylarkav.com. While Jeremy is still a proponent of Ross Video and has an extensive church background, all of which we're going to learn from today, I wanted to make sure you knew his role has changed. In talking with Jeremy, we decided to leave all the introductions the same, so you'll hear us intro and talk as if he works for Ross, but please know that he now works for Skylark. Okay, after that confusing disclaimer, let's get this podcast started. Today's church tech tip is the touch drive switcher panel from Ross Video. To talk to us more about this product, please welcome to the Tech Arts Podcast, Jeremy Bagwell. Hey, Jeremy.
Hey, what's up? Glad to be here. I think it's been a while. We've been trying to put this together.
We have been trying to put this together for a while, and I'm glad to have you on. We're going to talk a little bit more about IMAG and BROADCAST a little bit later, but we always do a church tech tip to kind of give our audience some new technology that's out there that they can go look at and put their hands on, because after all, it's a lot of techs that listen to the podcast.
Cool.
So if we didn't give them that, they'd be like, "What the heck is all this other stuff?" But tell us a little bit about this touch drive.
Yeah, the touch drive panel came out a couple of years ago. It works with our carbonite switchers or Acuity switchers. So we say touch drive switcher panel because it is a panel. It is a control surface for a switcher. So there's no video I/O processing on the panel. It's because there's so many more inputs than maybe the small format switchers usually have. So it connects to a switcher frame and gives you control of like taking camera one or putting graphics in and all those type of things. So if you're familiar with controlling a video switcher, then the touch drive panel is the way to operate the video switcher. It's just a control surface.
It looks like a switcher to me, but if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like it's a little bit more, even though there's a tactile thing you can touch, it's a little bit more virtual, so it can expand with your switcher. If you expanded your switcher, are you saying you don't have to start all over?
Well, you don't have to start all over because inside of the carbonite panel, the carbonite frame itself, you can upgrade to more MEs when you need it and things like that. You can also the reason why I say you can expand is because the touch drive panel has very similar look and feel no matter what size. So maybe for the first couple of years, you have the small one, and then maybe the small one then moves over to becoming a switcher panel to control your broadcast stream, still connected to the same switcher frame, and you can get a larger panel that connects to the same frame and operates a different ME. So what I am a big fan of is that because of the way you can stylize it and color things differently, and they're touch mnemonic, so every screen is a touch screen. So there's deeper menu things that you can get into, and you can have a more customized way of operating the switcher.
Does it just control Ross products, or is it able to control like playback devices and things of that nature?
Great question. The touch drive panel doesn't do any of the the switcher frame. So all of our switchers control external devices like, video, like ProPresenter or Pro Video Player or any of the Ross video servers. Anything with really some type of TCP connection can ultimately be controlled by the switcher frame. Now, those handles of control are on the touch drive panel, right? But it doesn't matter if it's a touch drive panel or whatever. It's through the TCP connection of the switcher frame itself. Does that make sense?
It does. And what I love about the Ross ecosystem is you're very familiar with churches, how church literally operates. You mentioned ProPresenter there. A lot of other video companies would be like, ProPresenter what? And so it's really cool that when you're inside the Ross ecosystem, whether it be the switcher, whether it be the touch drive, you understand what churches are doing and what they have to do with their products. And so what it sounds like you're saying is, even though this is kind of virtualized controlling the Ross switcher, you can put the handle on there to do everything that the switcher can do. And then as your switcher grows or even maybe downsizes or expands in different ways, the touch drive can be a solid piece that just stays with you as that goes along.
And it also provides like this, I call it elevated user experience. So like from my 15 plus years of being in church production full time before working at Ross Video, I realized, hey, having a volunteer in front of a video switcher is very intimidating for them. And so what I love about the touch drive panel is it allows us as people in charge of the volunteer experience, we can give them an elevated volunteer experience. So like we can say, hey, everything on this thing that's colored red does this. Everything that's green does this. Or let's build some macros, and the red macros do this, or the green macros do this. Or so therefore, when they sit down, they feel like, oh, okay, cool. There's so many different ways to use a switcher. This is how we at our church on our Sunday morning or our Wednesday night, this is how we function. Here are the things built out, laid out, ready to rock. That's what I love the most about it, because there's just so many options and how you can set it up to make it easy and lower the learning curve.
So you can customize it. Like I could do a nice red button that says sermon video announcements, and they just hit that button and it does it.
Yeah. For me, it's lyrics in. So I think the thing that I missed all the time was we went from like pastor's welcome into worship music, and we just totally forgot to like put ProPresenter on the screens because we were doing other things. Like, so I was like, there's a red lyrics in button. Just hit the red button. That's all we have to do.
Hit the red button.
No one has to fumble around for a keyer or like what source it is. Just hit the red button.
Well, if you want to find out more about Ross products, go to rossvideo.com. Ross is proud to boast the industry's widest range of video product solutions. Find out more about them at rossvideo.com. Jeremy, are you able to hang with us a little longer and talk some switching, get into IMAG broadcast, and maybe talk a little bit about cinema and the cinematic looks that are very popular right now?
Yeah, I'd love to. I got a lot of thoughts about it, so it'd be a fun convo.
Make sure you stay put for this conversation. Jeremy and I will talk the difference between IMAG and broadcast switches, best practice principles for both IMAG and broadcast. We'll dive into the world of cinematic, what it means, and how you can shoot that way and what it changes. Plus, we'll talk volunteers, kids on your tech team, why rehearsals matter, even for the video team. All of that is coming up right after this word from our sponsors. Hang on, everyone. From sold-out stadiums to intimate live performance venues, sound engineers agree on one thing for the best digital mixing consoles for live sound. The only name that matters is Digico. As the recognized worldwide standard for live audio mixing, Digico consoles are renowned for their industry-leading sound quality and ease of use. Whether your application is in a church, broadcast, theater, corporate, sports, or installed sound, Digico offers compact and affordable products. From the S21 all the way up to the pioneering power of the Quantum 852, Digico delivers the workflow, the feature set, and the absolute reliability that the world's biggest tours and programs have come to rely upon. If you're looking for a sound console, look to Digico for your answer. For more information on Digico, go to digico.biz. That's digico.biz. With Sermon Shots church-specific AI, sermon highlights don't go unnoticed. Easily transform your sermons into 10-plus bite-sized clips, ready for social media. It doesn't stop there. Refine each clip by adding or removing video sections, give them your unique touch with colors, fonts, design edits, and create the goosebump moment with background music. Elevate your message and reach hearts locally and globally. Start today by going to sermonshots.com.
What's MXU? We get asked that all the time. MXU is the platform for churches to recruit, train, and retain their volunteer teams. It starts with our vast content library with discipline-specific training videos. You can assign videos to team members, upload your own videos, and you can even organize them into courses for a more guided approach. You can keep track of a volunteer's watch progress and check in when they might be falling behind. And with groups, you can keep track of multiple teams and assign roles to specific users to give them the ability to manage your volunteer team. It doesn't matter if you're a team of 5 or 50, MXU will help you care for and stay on top of training for each volunteer. This is MXU, used to help churches recruit, train, and retain their volunteer teams. Join the community and start using MXU for free today.
From front of house to center stage, for over 25 years, Earthworks microphones have sculpted the sounds of your favorite concerts, venues, and performances. Earthworks Audio is a sponsor of the Tech Arts Podcast. We are so happy to have them on board and excited to promote the new Earthworks SR117 vocal mic and capsules. To find out more about Earthworks Audio or to get your hands on this mic, go to earthworksaudio.com. That's earthworksaudio.com. Capturing emotion with sound. earthworksaudio.com. Our main sponsor is Digital Great Commission Ministries. Whether you need help building a team, finding the right gear, or just better understanding the church tech world, DGCM is here for you. Because they are a 501c3 donor-sponsored organization, they come to your church for free and do an assessment of your tech, visitor engagement, and online streaming. Plus, we give away free gear. Be sure to go to audiovideolighting.com and register your email today. This will sign you up for all of the free giveaways and give you first access to everything we offer for free. If you want free resources, training, or consulting, contact Digital Great Commission Ministries today by going to audiovideolighting.com. That's audiovideolighting.com. Welcome back to the Tech Arts Podcast. Today we're going to be diving into the subject of IMAG and broadcast, plus touching on a few other topics that are important to the church and how it operates video. Joining us today to talk about all of this is Jeremy Bagwell from Ross Video. Hey, Jeremy.
Hey, what's up?
How are you doing, man?
Oh, man. Just living life and, having one podcast recording at a time, helping churches. It's fun.
Yeah, well, I just gave the intro and told everyone that you're from Ross, but what they don't know is that you have an extensive background working with churches. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what all you have done and what all you are currently doing.
Yeah. So what I have done is since, I call myself like a church geek. I grew up as a pastor's kid, and then sometime around when I was 16, started playing in worship bands. This is in the late 90s. So yes, I have gray hair, and yeah, I'm that old. So playing in worship bands in the late 90s was not very good, but I really, really loved church production, loved creating worship experiences, which was all kind of like new from a modern standpoint. It's like, oh, we can sing songs and like rock and roll style instead of hymns. So really fell in love with that. My faith obviously was a big deal, and still is, but that helped get me into where I am now, which means basically over the last 18 years working full time in church production. There was one point in time where I became a student pastor because that's just what you did. In the early 2000s, that's how you worked at churches. There wasn't really any like full-time production people.
Yeah, the student pastor was the IT person. They were the camera, switcher, director, audio. They were everything, including the youth.
Yeah, I think I was building like websites for the church too. Like I was like a WordPress template hacker, back in the day. So did a lot of different things, and really found my way with full-time production, running audio. Then eventually moved over to a large church here in the Atlanta area. I fell in love with video, started video directing, video engineering, really all the audio, video, and lighting engineering side of things. And then right before I joined Ross, I was working at North Point Community Church. So all in all, 3 churches over the span of about those 15 to 18 years in full-time church work. So it's been really fun. I've learned a lot, and I have a huge passion for church techs and production managers, directors to have great Sunday experiences. That's my passion.
You said you were a pastor's kid?
Yeah.
So you gave your dad gray hair early, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I remember crawling under pews during sermons, small church, small Southern Baptist church life.
Yeah. He's like, point number one, Jeremy, get back in your seat.
Exactly. Correct. Well, yeah. Or my mom's throwing things at me. Anyway, yeah.
Well, let's get into our subject matter today, and I'll just hit you with the first question here, man. What's the difference between IMAG and broadcast switch? So we have a lot of, techs out there. I know we have some pastors that listen. They end up having, like the youth pastor, they end up having to do it all. And they probably heard us earlier say IMAG broadcast, and like, what the heck's that? So What's the difference between the IMAG and the broadcast switch?
I would say that like what I say is not necessarily what I don't know if it's what everyone would say, but I describe it just from the experiences I've had. Broadcast is a style in which you present video to someone who is not in the same room as that experience happening. So think like Super Bowl, think any other large concert. There's audience in that experience, and they can look to the field, they can see what's happening. They can look to the scoreboard and see the video display, or a concert, same thing. But us as an audience on the other side of the TV or other side of the camera lens, we have a drastically different experience. We can't just look at a field. We have to be looking at the TV the entire time. And so a broadcast experience, or like broadcast versus IMAG, broadcast is like, hey, what is the experience that you're giving someone who only has this video screen to look at? So how do you help your experience extend from people who can see the room, being in the room? How do you extend that to people that could just see on a TV? The broadcast experience is a lot like there is no control for us who's watching the Super Bowl, right? We're at the mercy of whatever they show us. That's a broadcast experience. An IMAG experience is like, hey, I'm in the room and I have these large video screens. And the large video screens are going to help me translate what's happening in the room. I can turn my head and I can look at the wall or the door, or I can see, a lead singer. I can take my eyes and see a whole bunch of different experiences. And so when we say IMAG or image magnification, we're saying like, hey, we're creating an experience on those big giant displays, LED walls, projectors, TVs, whatever it may be. We're creating an experience for the audience to see maybe details that they can't normally see with their own eyes in the room. So think about like the snare drum. Well, people in the back of the room might not be able to see the snare drum and see the stick hitting the snare drum, or see the facial expressions of the drummer, or see the facial expressions of how the guitarist is worshiping. So for us, even though the person in the room can experience the whole room, we're giving them details that they can't necessarily see with their own two eyes.
Yeah, I think that's a good explanation. Yeah, IMAG, you're in the room. How do you bring it closer? Broadcast, you're outside the room. How do you show them the room? How do you show them what's going on? Now, you said Super Bowl 3 times. I meant to ask you this before we got into it. And this is going to air after the Super Bowl. But right now we're recording it before the Super Bowl. Yeah, so, Jeremy, who's your Super Bowl prediction? Who do you think's going to win?
Man, I'm on the Kansas City Chiefs. Me and my 11-year-old. Once the Atlanta Falcons were eliminated from the playoffs, then we kind of choose like our team for the rest of the playoffs. So mine was the Kansas City Chiefs. His was the Dolphins. Don't get me started on him being a Dolphins fan. But anyway, so Kansas City Chiefs, I just need Patrick Mahomes to be really good until the Falcons start being really good. So I'm kind of like, let Patrick Mahomes get his before the Falcons are good.
Well, I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan for life, so basically we lose every playoffs for like the last 28 years. So I'm in miserable land in terms of my team. But I think the NFL wants the Kansas City Chiefs to win, so I think the Kansas City Chiefs are going to win. I think they're going to beat the 49ers. Yeah. But I'm really not rooting for either team. It wouldn't matter to me which one won, but I think the Kansas City Chiefs are going to do it. Plus, I've never seen a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes. Like he just, puts a team. It doesn't matter how bad the rest of the team is playing. He puts a team on his back and takes them across the finish line. I think it's pretty amazing.
It's pretty incredible. Yeah. I could talk all day about football. So let's move on.
Are you a pro guy or a college guy?
I'm actually both. I don't work on Sundays, so like I have become much more NFL guy over the last 3-4 years. I mean, obviously because you're not working all day on Sunday anymore, so you can watch games. But ultimately, college football has been the thing that's we for 18 weeks, a year or whatever, that we orient our lives around Saturday college football.
I think I'm the same way. I'm kind of both, but I'm a little like with pro football, I'm Dallas all the way. With college football, I tend to pick different teams that I'm rooting for through the. Anyway, enough of that. Yeah. We need to get back on the subject matter here. So
let's go.
Let's back to this IMAG broadcast thing. So question about IMAG. What are some principles? You're out there listening, you're a tech, you're wanting to learn, like, how do I do this a little bit better? I understand what IMAG and broadcast is now. So what are some of the most important principles for an IMAG switch?
Most important principles, I say, I'll always think about the purpose. And I also say, so let's back up. Think about the purpose, and it being an IMAG situation. So you're wanting, and your purpose is to give more details. Now, we're leading them through an experience. So I think there's two different kind of styles in which we do things. There's the music moment, and then I would call there's the talking moment or sermon moment, welcome moment. So sermon and welcome are very similar in their styles. And then music obviously has a little bit different style, probably cutting to more things a little bit faster. Ultimately, IMAG is like, hey, use some discretion, because what these people in this room see on the screens is part of the experience. You're leading them. So you're like part of the worship leading experience. And so you have to think about it from that framework of like, I'm not doing like a very mechanical exercise of like, always do this, always do this, always do this. You're part of the artistic expression, but your expression is to lead in a very practical way, which means like, hey, right before someone starts singing, please cut to them and make sure we see them before they start singing, because that's going to help engage the person in the audience to start singing as well. We want to see the worship leader sing. We want to, if everybody's singing all the time, then let's see the facial expressions and the emotions. Let's not see a tight shot of the guitar in a moment where we're wanting the audience to sing along. Like we want to help motivate people and engage so they can start engaging in worship with our Savior just the same way as the worship leaders are. So the controversial thing that I would say that I don't know, you may agree or disagree with me, but our role, like in doing cameras on screens, it's not a creative position, and I know a lot of people think differently about that, or it's not an artistic position. Our role is to help engage, but there's a line when art becomes distracting, and so we have to make sure, like, hey, maybe it's not our job to be creative. Maybe it's our job to capture the creativity and the art that's happening in the room. And I think sometimes because camera positions, especially in the film, we watch shows every day, every week. We watch shows that have very, very artistic camera shots. But those are done with a purpose because the producer director is trying to engage us in the show. The worship experience is a whole nother level of like, we're wanting people to engage with their Savior. We don't want them to engage with the camera shot. We don't want them to be distracted by what that camera's doing. Oh, what a great shot. Like for me, it's like, I don't want an audience person to be like, what a creative shot. I don't feel like that moves people into that puts us in the spotlight, not Jesus. So there's a fine line there, but you have to find it. And you have to continue to repeat that and say, our job is to tell the story, show what's happening, and help translate what's happening on the stage and help audience engage with it.
The way I like to say it is the camera, the switcher is an instrument of worship. And I think if you think of it that way, just like a guitar player or a keyboard player is on the stage, if you think of it as an instrument of worship, I think it allows you to navigate that line of distraction, not distraction, a little bit better. And here's what I mean by that. As a worship leader playing electric guitar, if you ran to the front of the stage, landed on your knees, and stuck your tongue out as you were playing the electric guitar, well, you're still leading worship. But at that point, it's all about you and not about what's going on in the room, as far as, inviting an atmosphere that the Lord Jesus Christ can come into and move. It's all about that person. Well, I think the same thing applies for camera operators. It's your instrument of worship. I think with IMAG, for me, it's a little bit more logistical. Like, we're trying to show people things and get a closer shot so that if they're in the back of the room, they feel closer to what's going on the platform. And so I think IMAG leans a little bit more logistical. I think during worship, IMAG probably leans logistical, but has more creative in it during worship. But then when you get to the sermon, I feel like IMAG is almost strictly logistical. You're really just trying to bring people closer, make sure they see the sermon notes and that he's trying to present his sermon points and things like that. But for broadcast, this, talk a little bit about the important principles for broadcast, because I think that dynamic, at least in my opinion, shifts a little bit when you talk about broadcast and somebody sitting at home and watching. So talk about some of the important principles for the broadcast switch.
Yep. So when you think about engagement, and you think about like, okay, engagement, audience in the room, and then you then shift over to, okay, if I'm just watching a video screen of a church service, and if we took the IMAG switcher cut, that's, the ME, the thing that's changing the camera shots, on the screen. If we took that video and put it on a screen in front of you at your home, you would see a bunch of tight shots. You would never see the audience. You would probably never see 4 or 5 worship leaders all together, because IMAG is making things bigger, showing the audience details that they can't see with their own eyes. So what's really difficult is when you do that on a screen, and it would be a cool exercise for folks who like to do that, to record it and then watch it during the week and be like, and see what it feels like. It just feels like everything's up close, everything's here, and I don't see. If I'm sitting in my home watching, I want to see what the room is doing. I actually want to see what the congregation is doing, and when I see the congregation connecting, raising their hands in worship, maybe laughing, the audience is laughing at a joke or a comment that the pastor makes. When I see that, it gives me permission to do that as well. It doesn't make me feel like I'm on the other side of the TV and just being like, oh, I'm not sure what's happening. Like it frees you up to feel like you're part of the experience that's happening and you're kind of joining with them. And so when you take maybe take some other camera wide in the room and you show the audience, it does give this, like, I don't know, the way I express it is like it opens everything up and disarms us in a lot of ways when we're watching on the other side of the screen. Imagine like a football game where all we saw was like quarterback tight shots, and like we never got to see the fan experience. We never saw fans cheering, and we were just watching the players waist up shots. We would be like, what else is happening? Like we would be there's got to be some other things that are going on,
Like Taylor Swift in her box cheering.
Exactly. Yes. Right. So that's the broadcast cut or broadcast experience. And I think a lot of churches could do a little more thinking about, like, how are we being intentional about that? How are we being intentional with helping people connect and be moved by what's happening in this room? So let's show them, and just think through that with a little bit more purpose.
The word I use is it's more immersive.
Yeah.
Which is a good point. I know we're talking a lot about video, but on the audio side of things, I think having audience mics and things of that nature that allow people to feel like they're in the room, I think those are some keys to broadcast. I tell people all the time, I'm like, they're like, hey, how do we get into broadcast? And I said, well, take your IMAG switch and every now and then add a wide shot. Like you don't have to go super crazy with this out of the gate, and maybe you don't have all of the tools and instruments to be able to do multiple switches. But speaking of that, the 2 ME switcher thing, you said ME there earlier. Kind of explain that. And for a church that maybe doesn't have a 2 ME switcher, but they have auxes or some other things, help talk through how they can maybe get to a broadcast switch.
So an ME is similar to the audio desk. It's a way to create two different outputs, right? It's not the same thing. It's a way to flavor, like in audio world, when I was learning audio, it's like, hey, you're sending two different flavors of ice cream out, right? Like that's what the audio desk does. Well, that's what the video switcher does, is sending two different flavors of the video. So think like ME1 may have camera 1 in that moment, and then ME2 goes to your broadcast, and maybe it has camera 2, or maybe camera 8, or camera whatever 4, whatever it may. In every moment, you're able to choose independently what camera goes to what ME. Or if you don't want to use, if you're getting caught up in the word ME, we just say like output 1 and 2, or aux 1 and 2. So you get to choose independently. Now, what's really cool about video switchers, and similar to audio consoles, you can then sync them up. So one of those, like when you like take camera 1, take camera 4, that is then going to both outputs in a certain moment, and then you can split them apart and flavor them separately. So it could be the same thing, or it could be separate. So however your video switcher may work, you can use AUXs or MEs to accomplish that task. But that's the overall concept.
To me, as an audio guy, I'm glad when you said AUXs, because I think a lot of audio guys, that makes it a little bit easier for them to understand, is it's basically a separate output, like your send to your foyer and your send to your main PA. That's exactly what two MEs are. And what's really great about Ross, and a lot of video switchers do this, but what I like about Ross and the fact that they really understand churches is everybody sitting out there right now is going, oh, do I need two people now? One to switch IMAG, one to switch broadcast. I'm an old school guy, and if you have tons of budget, then yeah, that's great. Have a person who's switching IMAG, have a person who's switching broadcast. But what's great about Ross is they make a lot of things really easy when it comes to macros, when it comes to buttons on the switcher that allow one person to actually switch for IMAG and broadcast. So you're in the middle of an IMAG switch, and maybe when you take a certain shot, it will automatically take a wider shot for your broadcast. Talk a little bit about that and how you can set it up so that one person can do both.
Yeah, I like to think about it. So, you can go to like our website, see the video switchers that we have. Touch drive panels is what our video switcher control surface is. So we can give you a visual about like what I'm talking about. But you got buttons, and you're choosing basically in that moment whatever camera you want it to be, or maybe it's a graphic source or whatever. So you're like, okay, I need to take camera 1, now you need to take camera 4, camera 2, so on and so forth. So you can have a camera 7 button. Now, when you press that camera 7 button, it doesn't take it on the ME1 bus because that's going to your IMAX screens, but it takes camera 7 in ME2 or an aux, depending on how you have it set up. And so, like, think about like you're strolling along, and all of a sudden the pastor's like setting up a joke, and you hear laughter happen, and you just boom hit the camera 7 button. You don't have to like navigate to a different stripe. You don't have to go fumble around to figure out like, oh wait, where's that? How do I do that? Like boom, it's right there, clearly defined on that same row of buttons that you're already working on. So boom, hit that. Now that takes camera 7 or your audience shot to your broadcast, and then I would set up another macro that says like program sync or IMAG sync. Basically, then it allows the broadcast to be synced back up with what you're doing on ME1. And so it's really just two buttons. It's just boom. You hit camera 7, they laugh, and you're like, okay, now I'm ready to go back to tight shots on broadcast. So you hit your sync button, and now everything that you do on your ME1 bus is also going to your broadcast. And you can kind of set those macros up for many different cameras that you want to control on your broadcast experience.
And what's great about Ross, just to brag on Ross a little bit here, Jeremy, is because you guys understand churches, you can look at the specific workflow that the church has, and you can set up their switcher so that it works for them. Because not one situation is every situation. And so what I like about Ross is that you guys kind of come in and say, oh, I've even seen you save money where churches are coming in saying, hey, we need a 3 ME switch. And you look at the situation and go, you could probably do this with 1 ME and an aux output or whatever. So they look at kind of your flow, your workflow, and help you navigate that with the technology. So just to brag on Ross a little bit for that. But let's talk a little bit about the word cinematic. It's a buzzword right now in the Christian community.
Oh, yeah.
It's I would call it a landmine a little bit. So what does this word mean? Does it require me to shoot 24 frames per second? Like a lot of people get angst when they hear the word cinematic. Like talk through that word a little bit and let's put some minds at ease.
Yeah. So it's been really fascinating over the last 2 years to have this conversation. And the cinematic concept is for someone who doesn't know and like, oh, there's a difference between the two. Well, the difference between the two is like when you go to a movie and you watch a movie, a lot of those are captured, recorded, and edited, and then exported in the cinematic style. Because cinematic style, you could Wikipedia the article. There's a whole long history of cinema, and so there was for a long period of time, the cinema industry making films standardized on a certain frames per second. And then the broadcast video industry standardized on a different frames per second. The reality is that they both accomplish some great things in what they do, but they all have their pros and cons. But ultimately, when you think cinematic, what you're seeing and what the reason why people are like, oh, I want cinematic or I want broadcast. Cinematic is a shallow depth of field, which means, think about like our iPhone cameras or the newest ones are doing this, where it's like I'm in focus and then my everything in the background, like right past my shoulders, are like way out of focus. A big bokeh type of like, I can't even tell what's there. Football is doing it now, and a lot of other sports are doing it where even the sideline reporters are using cinema glass or cinema lenses and cameras to capture that interview where like you can barely tell there's football players behind them. Well, that's because it's very shallow depth of field. The reason why that was a lot of the reason why it existed in cinema is because they were doing a movie shoot and it's very artistic, and the experience didn't require for me as a viewer to really know the detail of the background. I just needed to see the color. I don't need to see all the details. It also, a long time ago, before we had like all these massive render engines and to be able to create like virtual backgrounds, it also allowed them to save a ton of money on sets. So it's like, oh, throw up a door, paint it with a splash of color, call it good, because there's no detail. Like cameras, it's not capturing that detail, And then as fast forward to now, we've fallen in love with that style because it does look very different than a broadcast. Now, the other side of the spectrum is broadcast, where it's like everything's in focus. Think about 2 years ago, before we were doing touchdown celebrations, like Patrick Mahomes scores a touchdown, camera shot like on a steady cam, circling around him, and I can see 10 rows deep, completely in focus. I see Patrick Mahomes in focus, and I see the entire stands. I can see everything that they're doing. Well, that's what broadcast is. Broadcast is like, hey, we want to see every detail of that background. And so it's become a very, very specific style. The other thing with cinema is that it's very dramatic. So cinema is, when we watch movies, we're riding a roller coaster of emotions, which is great. Side note, we do a lot of different emotions and roller coasters in sports, but it's more product of how they're playing great or not.
Yeah, especially if you're a Dallas Cowboys fan like me. There's a lot of roller coaster of emotions.
Right. Yeah. But cinematic would not help that. It's just the play of the players.
I'm not sure nothing will help that.
Right. But what's great about the cinema, like the shallow depth of field, there's ways that these video directors on these films can help create tension or actually release tension. They can create emotion. They can create suspicion with the way it's shot and how things are blurred out in the background. stuff like that. Well, in broadcast, you're like, no, I'm telling a story where I want to see all of the story, and I'm just capturing the emotion of what's happening. I'm not crafting an emotion. But there's a lot more than just the video camera and the lens. Lighting is like 90% of the experience. You can take everything can be in focus, and you can have great lighting that also makes it feel like a cinema experience. We can do that. We have a live event. We have a lot of things in our control, our production system, and lighting is the number one thing to really shape that emotion of that experience.
I think you're right. Lighting creates the look and the feel and some of the moments behind the band and the worship team. But here's my take on cinematic. You explained, the frame rate per second for video and the frame rate per second for cinema, and which ended up being 24 frames per second is what the cinema world used. But a lot of people don't know how they got there. How the cinema world got there was at 30 frames per second, the reels were too big to distribute to the film, the different outlets that would play the films. So they started going backwards, 29, 28, 27, 26, 25, 24. When they got to 23 frames per second, the human eye just couldn't stand it. It was so jittery, so staticky that it didn't work. But at 24 frames per second, most people accepted it and were fine with it. And at 24 frames per second, the reels were small enough to distribute to all the theaters to play the film. So 24 frames per second didn't start off as this is cool, this is what we want to do. They always knew that 30 frames per second and higher was the better looking, more appealing to the eye look. 24 frames per second ended up being what was financially responsible for them to distribute to the theaters. Now, with that said, we all got very used to what that look was. It was not a lot of pans, not a lot of quick zooms. It was a lot of these static kind of shots, because too much of that, which is why it doesn't look good when your pastor's up there, too much of the zooms, pans, and people walking, it gives you that staticky kind of jittery kind of look. Now, that looks well, especially if you're doing 24p, looks really well during worship, but can look exactly the same as broadcast if you don't light it and shade it in a way that gives you that immersive feel for broadcast. Shooting behind your audience members so you can see some heads and some hands. That's a more cinematic look than just shooting tight shot on the worship leader. And so things like that are what bring the cinematic look. You don't necessarily have to have cinematic cameras or a cinematic frame rate to have a cinematic look. Do you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. And that's why I talked about hey, try to figure out what's your goal? What are you really trying to accomplish through this? And I think that's when you understand the history plus the when you watch a movie, understanding they're crafting an emotion in this moment. They are moving me in this moment. Well, that same thing can happen in a broadcast experience, but it's a completely different thing. When I watch the Weather Channel, they're moving me, but it doesn't require shallow depth of field, and it doesn't require dramatic lighting, right? So I think we get caught up in some of the technical specs of this is what it has to be to capture this experience and to make it look a certain way and feel a certain way. But there's a lot of different tools, and I think lighting is the best place to start to give yourself, a cinematic experience.
Yeah, I agree with that. Plus, some of the frame rate stuff can actually be added to your video as an effect.
Right.
The Super Bowl did this a few years ago. They wanted a 24 frames per second look. They never changed off their 60 frames per second. They just added an effect on top of what the video looked like in order to get the 24 frames per second kind of look and feel. So again, I tell people go out there and look at the top 5 movies in the world. They were not shot at 24 frames per second. Look at some of the major live music videos that were out there. A lot of them weren't shot at 24 frames. They were shot at 60 frames per second, and then they put an effect on top of it. So it's really not about the frame rate. It's more about the lighting, the immersive feel. But with that, a lot of churches forego the ability to remotely shade and iris their cameras. I go into a church and they're like, what do you mean by shading and irising? I don't even know what that means.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that. I mean, if you want a cinematic look, even a broadcast standard production look, how important is it to be able to shade and iris your cameras specifically remotely from onboard the camera?
How important? Very important, because it's you're dealing with an unpredictable environment. So the lighting in this moment, no matter how sophisticated your lighting operator may be or not, you could have like a complete rookie volunteer running lights, or you could have a pro person running lights. Ultimately, your camera will be pointed at something that is not lit the way you as a director or you as the production want it to be lit at. And so the camera can actually make the shot. We know this from our iPhones, right? Or any of our phone cameras. You can have the ability to make it brighter or darker. And so in a certain moment, we may want it to be brighter than what light is being given, or we may want it to be darker. And so it's really important to be able to do that. It's so you have the option. You can do it at the camera, like physically the operator doing it at the camera, or you can be doing it remotely. I recommend remotely because I just want a camera operator to worry about what's in the frame. Like, hey, I want you to worry about like headroom and how we're like shooting the framework of this camera. I don't want you to have to be worrying about like how bright or dark the camera may look. So because of the way it gets cumbersome with where those controls are, and every camera's different.
Yeah, I think you want it to match as well. I went to a major church, big church, and one camera was really bright, one camera was really dark. Like, matching's important, right?
Yes, it's understood in my brain. Like, yes, your cameras from shot to shot to shot should match. And here's the reason why. It goes back to the purpose of what we're doing. The purpose of what we're doing is telling a story and creating as few distractions as possible. If we go from a dark shot to a bright shot and back and forth, it immediately kicks into our brains as the viewer to decode and try to understand what's happening. And so I've just introduced a layer of thought about the camera shot that, oh, that's weird, or like, that's surprising. Well, I don't want people to be surprised by the camera shot. I want people to be engaged with what's being said. So for us to have a different look from shot to shot to shot, or different brightness, goes against the whole purpose of why we're doing what we're doing. So that's why it needs to be a consistent. Your goal is to be it can be consistently dark or consistently bright, or anywhere in between. It just needs to be consistent. So therefore, you're not introducing that momentary where our brains go, wait, I wonder what's happening. You know, like, why is that? Because they're off from being engaged with what's happening on the other side of the lens.
Yeah, and if you have a shader, now your volunteers don't have to worry about getting that cinematic look. Your volunteers can shoot it the way you ask them to shoot it, and the shader can shade it so that it looks cinematic. You've kind of crushed your blacks where you want them to be, and he can see and call out, oh, the lighting's not quite right here, and make those fixes. But, you know, as an audio guy, I could never go into a service without a sound check or a rehearsal. Yet I watch a lot of churches go into a service without their camera operators and their directors ever having a rehearsal, and they kind of switch the first service, you know, with maybe 5 minutes of the rehearsal or whatever. Yeah. So talk a little bit about why rehearsals matter.
Rehearsals matter for the sake of we want to minimize distractions. So rehearsals matter because it's like we always do things on the fly. Like let me back up and say it this way. We want to reduce as many variables as possible. And so when you're thinking about like, hey, we need, a waist up shot or a tight shot or a head to toe shot. In that moment without a rehearsal, you're like, I don't know. Do we need a head to toe here? Do we need a tight shot here? You're constantly kind of like guessing and trying to think ahead. And therefore, like in our brain space, like we only have a certain capacity in every moment to make decisions. So a rehearsal helps like, oh, that person's going to stand there. I'm going to take camera 2 in this moment because camera 2 always is my head to toe shot. And that's the type of shot I need. So it's able to, then when you get to the real thing, you're like, okay, cool. I know what I'm doing here. I know what I'm doing here. The reason why you want to reduce the amount of like variables and processing time during a real surface is because we all know we're going to be introduced, because it's a live event, it's a live worship experience. There's going to be variables that happen that we didn't prepare for. That's going to happen. And so rehearsal helps us remove as many as we can so we can be prepared for the things that we don't know that is going to happen. That's kind of my opinion, and say like the value of rehearsal is making sure you think, and you can see like how things look, you can see the lighting, you can plan and prepare a little bit better, you can get a little bit more organized, and ultimately you can, have a more engaging experience. Both the IMAG and broadcast experience can be more engaging when you've, seen it before it actually happens.
Plus, not everything that we plan goes the way we think it's going to go.
Right.
And I think rehearsals help expose transitions and different things that we were planning on doing. And as we go through the rehearsal, we're like, oh, that didn't work out well. A good story that I like to tell people is I went to, I think it was a college football concert, college football playoff concert a few years back. And Sting was the headline act. And so I got there early, got in to see the crew and kind of everything that was going on. And I said, hey, what do you guys have going on this afternoon? They said, well, we have a rehearsal with Sting. And I'm thinking the band's going to come out and sing, and it's, they're going to do 10 minutes of a rehearsal or sound check and then head on back. They came out with Sting and rehearsed for an hour and a half.
Wow.
I mean, these are songs he's been singing for 40 years?
Yeah.
And I said, wait, is this a new band? And they're like, no, this band's been with him forever. Yet we go into a Sunday morning with different people, with different singers, different band members, and different texts, and we think we can nail it on the first try.
Right.
Here's a pro who hit the stage and rehearsed for an hour and a half to make sure that he got it right. And they made changes too. He was like, oh, that didn't hit right. And, the audio guy had to make some adjustments. Video had to make some adjustments. And so I like to use that story to say, hey, this is a guy who's been doing the same songs for 40 years. He comes out for an hour and a half and is still making tweaks.
Yep.
We talked about the Super Bowl. Yep. Major football players still have a coach. Yep. They still practice, and which is their version of a rehearsal. And then yet on Sunday morning, we come out and we think we can nail it without any rehearsals. So rehearsals do matter. They do line people up and help them avoid issues. And speaking of that, kids on camera.
Okay.
I got some questions for you here. Okay. People have emailed me, and this is the question they ask. Do churches need age limits when it comes to who runs the camera, directs, shades? What's your opinion on this? You've been in and around churches quite a bit. You've helped them set up switchers and different things of that nature. What's your opinion on this?
My opinion is you create age limits when you're not willing to have the real conversations, which is kind of tough to hear. But a 10-year-old kid, to be honest, on a stick camera with pin tilt bars, can be just as good as me, a 40-year-old camera op, to be honest. But we could also have a 12-year-old who's awful. And we could have a 40-year-old who's awful. And so I think what we do is that we try to create these rules that we think are best for everybody involved, when the reality is is just have a conversation and say, hey, you know what? It's okay. It's okay if it's not your thing. Like, or let's do better coaching or better training, or like, hey, come in and we just always scared, I think. Now, it's easier said than done, but I just know I lived it. We get scared of having those conversations, and we want to create some rules around. So therefore, it's almost like the rules are predicting like we'll never have a bad camera op. Okay, here's the camera ops that we need. Like, hey, you need to have graduated high school, or you need to be past high school age. You know, it's like, well, why? I don't really know, other than I know like they're 18-year-olds are probably predictively more responsible and more capable. True statement. You know, that's true. But you could have some really great camera ops that you're, as a 15-year-old or 13-year-old, and you're also not giving them that experience. So like, I don't know. The older I get, the more I'm like, less rules, more conversations, which is always easier said than done.
I like to say if your rule is intended to limit young people from being involved, then it's a bad rule.
Yeah.
I think your rules need to be intended to protect young people, make sure that you have, the right policies and procedures in place to make sure that young people can be a part of the team. Example would be 2 adults that go with them wherever, things of that nature. You need to have some of your kids' church policies, right? So those rules need to be in play.
Yeah.
But in terms of an age limit for cameras or shading, a 10-year-old is going to be better than a 40-year-old. I watch my son on editing and iPads and, what he does with YouTube and things of that nature and the animations that he's building. I'm like, these kids today are amazing. And to exclude them from your ministry, I think is a mistake. I worked for a big church here in the Dallas area, and 50% of the video ministry were under the age of 18. And honestly, they did a much better job and broke things a lot less than the adults did.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I think having kids involved is something that you should have. Of course, every DNA is different. Every church is different. But like I said, if your rule is designed to exclude, I think then that's an issue. I think we want to invite everybody in. But with that said, there's a key component to this that allows kids to be a part of your ministry, and that is training. And I think, obviously we need to do training. We need to make sure they understand how to run the camera and all those different types of things. But I want to ask this question a little bit different to you, Jeremy. Let's talk about retraining. How often should I retrain my directors, camera team, shader, video volunteers? And the reason why I'm asking you this question is because technology changes a lot. And how we do worship actually changes a lot. The way worship was being done 2 years ago, and we just talked about cinematic, 6 or 7 years ago, people weren't really doing that very often. Yeah. Now they are. Yeah. So how often should we retrain our directors? And is there a trigger that should be put in place to say, oh, we need to go and train some more?
Interesting question. I came into a season at one of the churches I worked at where their live video style was pretty dated. And if you kind of compare and contrast like what they were there then and then now, you would see, oh yes, that is a dated style. You wouldn't necessarily, as a volunteer, it's not what they do. It is a craft, and it is something that they love doing, but it's not the thing that they study every day. So for me and you, David, it's like these are live production and the style and the strategies and the technology, the things we study every day. That's like the things that we do. We live it. We're breathing it. We're like, hey, and we are seeing how the industry is moving forward and different styles and all that stuff. So our volunteers are going to do what we tell them to do. Most of them. And so it's really important for us to continue to evaluate what we're doing and why we're doing it. And retraining happens because, hey, guess what? We figured out we probably need to update some of the way we're doing things, or there's new technology involved, or, fill in the blank. And retraining is really hard because it's like, I had directors like, hey, I love the style that we're doing. And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, how do I tell them it doesn't look good when they've been doing it for 15 years every Sunday that way? And in their eyes, it looks good. They really like it. So it's a challenge, and it's really more of a leadership challenge than anything else. You can't systematize it or anything like that. You have to, help lead them through. And so I had 3 directors that were volunteers, and they pushed back on me, and because I was like, hey, we want to go more towards this style, less towards this style. And they were like, why? And they were really pushing back. And I said, okay, this week, send me YouTube clips of a live event, any live event in the last 5 years that looks the way you are doing video currently. I got 0 emails that week from them. And the next Sunday they were like, hey, I was like, go look at Elevation, go look at Hillsong, go look at whatever church that we're like kind of like inspiring or we love how they're doing things, and find, are they doing it? How are they doing it? What's their style? What is it? What's their look? So it's more of a leadership thing than anything else. And then once that like clicks and it's like, okay, you're leading them. It's kind of that thing like we have to take them on the journey. We've been through this growth journey by studying this craft of live production. They haven't been. And so we just have to bring them along and be like, hey, come on. Like, it's not going to be like tomorrow we're doing it. It was a journey of like, hey, go see, give me feedback. If you find somebody like, yeah, I'm open to all kinds of things, but you got to bring them along the journey. And I think the retraining is that there's a lot of people and volunteers, they don't want to change, to be honest. Humans, we don't want to change. We don't. Like, that requires more work. It creates anxiety. It makes us feel anxious. It makes us feel inadequate and incompetent. So like, for change is hard. So to be retrained in something is a very difficult task. It's a very important task, but it's very much more leadership than it is like nuts and bolts.
Yeah, that makes sense. It kind of leads me to the next thing, and that is, what your switch looks like, what your video looks like. That's defined in the secular world by producers, people who provide a vision for what the switch should look like. I think that's important to a video team, but if you're a church who can't hire a producer or you can't have a volunteer producer, how do you go about establishing that vision for the look and feel of your broadcast?
Yeah, it's really difficult. Ultimately, it does come down to like somewhere, some way, there's a like buck stops here person. There's a decision maker somewhere. It could be the senior pastor. It could be that. It could be, I've worked for senior pastors who were like, I don't care. I was like, hey, what do you want? And they're like, I don't care. Y'all just do whatever you want, like whatever you think's best. Right. And then it's like, okay, well, if that's the case, leadership by committee is not a great scenario. We've all learned that. Like, yeah, we could go a whole tangent of why leadership by committee is a very difficult thing. But someone ultimately needs to be empowered and have a position. And that's why we've created in the industry this producer role, even the director producer role in film. Like, there's a hierarchy. But there needs to ultimately be a decision maker. And I think identifying that, or at least, hey, pastor, I know you don't care, but we need somebody to be able to make decision or lead a team toward whatever we think might be the right way to go.
So Jeremy, he pushes that back onto you and says, okay, well, we can't really identify that person, so I'm going to make you that person.
Yep.
You're going to be the one. What would be your steps to kind of establishing that look for your church? Like you mentioned earlier, go look at some YouTube stuff of what some other people are doing, but what are some things that, it just gets pushed back onto the one person who does the switching every week? What are some things they could do to help them, get to a level of saying, hey, this is what our look's going to be when it comes to video?
Step one is understanding, like, before you can establish a look, you got to establish a purpose. And so establish your purpose. Okay, like, hey, Our purpose is to have a great IMAG or a great broadcast or both of them. And then our purpose is on those things, like you got to establish what great broadcast means, right? You got to define it. So it's like great broadcast is like bringing people in the room, capturing people laughing, that type of stuff. And then that suddenly starts helping have this look and stuff be, you get handles around it. You're like, okay, cool. That means a wide shots. That means this, that means that, like, and then your look begins to be developed. But, the purpose has to be decided. I think you can, there's a natural, if you're in that position, you're listening to the podcast and you're like already in that position, that means you have an aptitude or a passion or desire to be part of this live event, like behind the scenes. And so you probably have a natural intuition that is helping direct your purpose.
The reason why I asked you that question is because my next question is, how many cameras should you start out with? And I don't know if you guys listening out there noticed, Jeremy answered that as he was talking through the layout of the vision. I think it's different from every church, or for every church. But answer that question. How many cameras should you start out with? And again, you kind of helped with that just by saying, hey, when you lay out the producer side of it and when you lay out the vision, it's going to define how many cameras. But some churches are like, just hit us with how many we should start out with. So what's your answer to that?
I think you should start out with, to be honest, you should have 3 cameras that you can control either remotely or physically, on a camera riser. So not a static shot, right? Not just a static shot that never moves. I want to be able to pan, tilt, zoom. I think you need 3 of those because what that allows you to get is a camera shot that I'm on, a camera shot that I'm going to, and another camera shot that I'm going to. So that's a sequence of 3 different camera shots, 3 different looks. It gives me time. So if I'm like, say camera 1, 2, 3, take camera 1, it's on air, right? On screens. 2 gets a shot. Okay, great. 2, take 2, take 3. Well, it gives camera 1 the opportunity to have found something else before we get back around to camera 1. Or then I could go from 3 to 2 to 1, or 1 to 3 to 2. So you're always mixing it up, but 3 cameras gives those operators opportunity to go find something else. And then I always challenge my team, hey, we got 3 cameras. We want to make it look like we have 8 cameras, which means different shots. Like, okay, we get tight on the drums, and then you get super wide of the drums, and then you're getting this. So there's like all these and then the end user never thinks about how many cameras or never sees that same camera shot over and over. We're continually to give them a different flavor and a different perspective of what's happening. So that's why 3, I think 3. 2 can work, but I think ultimately 3 is probably the right number. That's 3 cameras that can move. Now, you can flavor in a bunch of other static cameras that don't move. They're just like a camera on the drums that is just the same shot and can't be controlled. But 3 moving is probably where I would start.
Yeah, I agree with you. Engagement is the name of the game. And if you only have 2 cameras, it's like, take this camera, take that camera. And it's really hard to engage with 2 cameras. If you have 3 cameras, you're taking this camera, 1 camera's moving, you can get to the other camera, another camera's moving. And so I think 3 cameras is probably the right number that you should start off with. Now, if you can only afford 1 camera, you can still do IMAG with 1 camera. If you can only afford 2 cameras, you could still do a broadcast switch. I think it'd be tough to do a broadcast switch with just 1 camera, but with 2, you could still do it. But then it goes back to that producer thing that we talked about earlier. And when a senior pastor says to you, justify why you have 5 cameras down here, if you've gone through the process of saying, well, I want to be able to create an engagement inside the room with a wide shot that shows everybody worshiping so that if you're at home, it brings them in. That's the language a senior pastor or whoever's making the purchases, typically it's a pastor who's not a tech. That's the language they want to hear. They just don't want to hear, well, I need 5 cameras so I can do more things. And that's how we look at it technically. But a pastor wants to hear, how's this going to engage people at home and how's it going to engage people in the room? So when you say, hey, I need a wide shot so that I can see, the room and I can see the colors and I can see what's going on and I can see the people worshiping, and I need this other camera so that they can get up there and get really close to the guitar player and show his fingers, things of that nature. That's the language that a pastor is typically wanting to hear when you're justifying a budget. It looks like you wanted to add to that a little bit.
Well, yeah, because it's like the love language of pastors. They've spent, I always tell people, like, the craft, like pastoring. Some people would disagree with me, but like pastoring is a calling. Pastoring is like a thing we do all as believers. We pastor people, whether we have like the ordained pastor thing. But our pastors, their real craft is like engaging communication. Like, they create engagement. They work tirelessly on crafting a sermon that people are engaged with, right? So for us, those are the words we should use when we're talking about the thing that we do. Hey, guess what, Pastor? I want to engage people. I want people to be engaged in what you're talking about. You've spent all this time dissecting Scripture, and now you're communicating it, and we want to help you engage. And this is what it would do, because that's their thing, It's not in a manipulative way. It's just a way of like, that's real true. We're not manipulating. We're just saying that's true. We want to engage. For us, we would naturally think about like, oh, want some more toys. We want to be able to do these different things, but it's really like, no, the words that the pastor needs to hear is like engagement.
Well, we've talked a lot about cameras. I got a trick question for you. What switcher brand do you recommend?
Oh, I only recommend it in honesty. It's not because I work for them. I said this to a friend of mine I was catching up with last week. He's like, you love your job? And I was like, man, I am just really, really lucky to represent a product that I would use every day. Like, I would choose it. And so it is a trick question, but I would recommend it whether I would recommend Ross Video, whether I work for Ross or not. And I'm just very fortunate and lucky that God gave me the opportunity to share about it every day.
So Jeremy, tell us, how do people get in touch with you? How do they get in touch with Ross? How do they get in touch with you and take this to the next step?
Yeah, I always say you can follow me on Instagram or follow our Ross Worship account on Instagram. So it's instagram.com/Ross Worship or instagram.com/Jeremy Bags. I'll a different episode explain why my Instagram handle is Jeremy Bags, but Jeremy Bags, or ultimately you can go to rossvideo.com. There's a contact us form, fill it out, send it to us. Those are the ways that we can take the next step. Just feel free to ping me and ask me any questions.
You can't leave us hanging, man. You gotta give me the 30-second. Why Jeremy Bags?
Well, so for a long time, my nickname in high school and everything was Bags. So people just, because Bagwell is my last name, and so it was just Bags. Hey, Bags. So I was late adopter to the social media thing. So I was late adopter. I couldn't figure out like as you go through, try to find a name that's like not a billion people have taken, So it's like, okay, Jeremy Bags is available, or it was going to be Jeremy Bagwell 500 or whatever, some random number. So for me, it was like, okay, Jeremy Bags. I didn't know that it was going to become the identity of my online platform. That was 15 years ago. And so now it's like, well, crap, I'm stuck,
Yeah, 15 years ago, nobody cared. And
right, nobody cared. It was like, okay, just pick a username. And I was like, okay, Bags and Jeremy. Okay, cool. Let's go.
Jeremy Bags.
Yeah, so that's the story. Now we know.
Well, to get in touch with Jeremy, follow him at Instagram at Jeremy Bags.
That's right.
Or you can also go to on Instagram, you can go to Ross Worship and follow them. But I would recommend you follow both. And if you need to get a hold of them, you can DM them. That's the word, right? DM, direct message.
That's right.
You can DM them there. I'm 47, so I'm trying to still pick up on the lingo and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, so. You there.
So again, if you want to get in touch with Ross, you can also go to rossvideo.com. They make video solutions that are affordable, professional, and very much supported. Plus, they get it. They fully understand the church market and what it takes to make Sunday happen. So you can go to rossvideo.com and look at all the cool products that they offer to the church community. Jeremy, thanks for coming on and sharing your vast knowledge with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's fun.
Well, that wraps things up for today's episode. I can't wait to talk to you on the next Tech Arts podcast. Until then, I'm David Leuschner signing off by wishing you a great day and praying God blesses every moment of your week. See you soon.
You have been listening to the Tech Arts Podcast, presented by Digital Great Commission Ministries. DGCM is a 501c3 nonprofit that was started to help churches with all things technical. Whether you need help building a team, finding the right gear, or just a better understanding of the church tech world, DGCM is here for you. Find out more about our free on-site visits, reports, and consulting by going to audiovideolighting.com. Digital Great Commission Ministries will help you run your church service like a pro. Find out more at audiovideolighting.com.
From sold-out stadiums to intimate live performance venues, sound engineers agree on one thing for the best digital mixing consoles for live sound. The only name that matters is Digico. As the recognized worldwide standard for live audio mixing, Digico consoles are renowned for their industry-leading sound quality and ease of use. Whether your application is in a church, broadcast, theater, corporate, sports, or installed sound, Digico offers compact and affordable products. From the S21 all the way up to the pioneering power of the Quantum 852, Digico delivers the workflow, the feature set, and the absolute reliability that the world's biggest tours and programs have come to rely upon. If you're looking for a sound console, look to Digico for your answer. For more information on Digico, go to digico.biz. That's digico.biz. From front of house to center stage, for over 25 years, Earthworks microphones have sculpted the sounds of your favorite concerts, venues, and performances. Earthworks Audio is a sponsor of the Tech Arts Podcast. We are so happy to have them on board and excited to promote the new Earthworks SR117 vocal mic and capsules. To find out more about Earthworks Audio or to get your hands on this mic, go to earthworksaudio.com. That's earthworksaudio.com. Capturing emotion with sound. earthworksaudio.com. With Sermon Shot's church-specific AI, sermon highlights don't go unnoticed. Easily transform your sermons into 10-plus bite-sized clips, ready for social media. It doesn't stop there. Refine each clip by adding or removing video sections, give them your unique touch with colors, fonts, design edits, and create the goosebump moment with background music. Elevate your message and reach hearts locally and globally. Start today by going to sermonshots.com. Luminex Network Intelligence manufactures data distribution equipment for professional lighting, audio, and video applications. Luminex offers a complete range of network switches, converters, nodes, and DMX splitters, providing AV designers and technicians with cutting-edge technology to build complete data distribution systems for churches, big events, or large venues. Through products like the Luminode, Luminex keeps it simple and allows the user to easily control what they need to do or how they need to do it. Whatever your configuration is today, or whatever your configuration is in the future, Luminex is designed for today, but built for tomorrow. Luminex Network Intelligence, AV networking made easy. For more information, go to aclighting.com. That's aclighting.com.